Thank you so much for being here. It's really excited to see all of you here. My name is Marisa Bolivar, and I'm a registered dietitian and nutritionist, and I am thrilled to be here on behalf of Templeton Hills Community Farm. For those of you who haven't seen it, it is right there, and they're working hard right now as we speak up there, so feel free to pop on up there and check it out after our class. If you would like updates about this class or a copy of the recording, usually we have it around Tuesday or so, please feel free to text Cook to that number, 434-1710, and that'll put you on a list to receive updates about the class. So the farm is a deeply meaningful project to me because it is such a wholesome community endeavor. And it largely brought us together during a really hard time. We opened a month before the first pandemic shut down. And so it was such a great opportunity for us to come together as a community and do something meaningful and significant and contribute to growth and connectedness and togetherness during the isolation of the pandemic. And it's really a testament to God's provisions because every time I go up there, I'm just in awe of how beautiful it is and something about getting your hands in the soil and seeing all that lovely produce. It tastes so much better too than what you would ever buy from the store. And if you've ever grown tomatoes in your backyard or something like that, you know that ripe and straight from the vine is far more delicious. So Matt Giese runs the show up there. He's sponsored by our church here, which is Templeton Hill Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we are largely sustained by community volunteers and donations that have helped us thrive and sustain ourselves. And he has also graciously brought down some produce for you to take home with you today. Feel free to fill a bag, and there is a donation box back there if you feel compelled to make a small contribution for any produce that you take, but no pressure. And then I want you to not only take it home with you, but eat it. Because there's something about like it makes it to your fridge, and then you actually have to wash it and consume it, which is a different challenge that even I am victim to sometimes. But I hope that you will appreciate it as much as my family has. And that has led us to our monthly nutrition and cooking class. We have explored a different nutrition topic every month and a produce item, but I'm going to liberalize you this month. We're not going to focus on a single produce item, but rather a group, because we have so many greens up there. And we already have talked about greens. That video is on YouTube in case you're worried about the specifics, but we have a lot of greens and a lot of carrots. And so we're not going to focus on a specific produce item this month. My husband's controlling the PowerPoint. Quotes of the month. Paul Stitt once said, "The cure for cancer will not be found under the microscope. It's on the dinner plate." Paul Stitt is an author and a biochemist. He spent much of his career as a food scientist, working for some very large food corporations. And he exposes the horrifying realities of how foods enter the American marketplace. And he's very critical of that process. And so it's an intriguing read. But the first thing that I want to point out is that cancer can be extremely unfair. And here I am a plant-based eater. I aim to reduce my risk factors. I'm a fierce believer in daily exercise. And I'm at risk for cancer too, just like everybody else. And so there are, plenty of exceptions to the controlling the risk factors, meaning you could do everything you can to accomplish risk reduction and still somehow end up with a diagnosis. But I think the name of the game in our fight against cancer is really prevention. And that could be preventing first-time illness, but it could also be preventing degradation of health if you are actively undergoing cancer treatment. or it could be preventing a cancer recurrence. So if you've had a history of cancer and you want to further reduce your risk so that it doesn't come back, we have a lot of great tools available for us to do that, because what you eat day in and day out makes a really big difference. And that's our single biggest point of influence in preventing cancer. And so I would say the most influential part of this is preventing it on the dinner plate. And then Dr. Kelly Turner said in her book, Radical Remission, Surviving Cancer Against All Odds, one of the most common traits or healing factors among radical remission survivors is the opposite of helplessness. It's taking control, taking ownership over your health. And that is what I love about food. There's so many things that we can't control. Environmental pollutants, genetics, chronological age, a lot of risk factors are outside of our control. But food is your choice, and that's what's special about it. It's a conscious decision. It's your tool to promote wellness and optimization of health, and it is yours to keep forever. So if you're sitting here today and you're going through chemo and or radiation therapy, you may not even feel like you have control over your treatment plan, but food is yours. And so that's going to be your biggest point of influence. There is something that I would like to point out about her book, Dr. Kelly Turner's book on radical remission. It's a really intriguing book. I encourage anyone to read it. I'm not in agreement with everything that she says, but that's okay. And she did paint this analogy of cancer that I would like to share with you. But just so you know what the book is about, she studies the outliers of the cancer journey. And so these are case studies. There's probably a couple thousand that she includes in her book of people who survived cancer truly against all odds. And they are the outlier because their prognoses were horrible. A lot of these folks were getting discharged on a hospice, and they were what would be considered to be done with their cancer journey. And they turned things around, and there was a lot of themes that she noticed in that process. And I think that it gives us some insight as practitioners, because we have a very focused in the box approach to our clinical pursuit to help people overcome their cancer diagnosis and promote survivorship. But we as humans are so complex, we're so layered, we're so multifaceted. And so I think it's important to understand that there's lots of variables that need to be treated in this cancer journey. But my favorite analogy that Dr. Kelly Turner talks about is that you have this basement in your house. And let's say one day you go down to the basement and it is dark and it's moist down there, and you notice in the far corner there's a patch of mold. And we're going to say that that mold represents a very treatable cancer. Let's say like a ductal cell carcinoma of the breast, or a low stage prostate cancer. And that is a very treatable patch of mold. But let's say you go down to the basement and you see that the whole basement is covered in mold. And that would be representative of our metastatic disease, right? Our metastatic cancer diagnosis. Well, our westernized approach, of course, is to scrub that mold down with bleach and a scrub brush, like chemotherapy and radiation, and eradicate that mold. And you might be very successful in doing that. You might very successfully, effectively eradicate the whole darn basement. But if you leave that basement and you go back upstairs and you shut the door and the environment is the same in which cancer thrived to begin with, there might be a good chance that it's going to come back. And so let's just say that all of a sudden you open up all the windows and you let in some fresh air. We're going to say that maybe that's parallel to good nutrition, right? You optimize your nutritional approach. Well, the cancer is probably going to have a lot of harder time coming back, right? Because you changed the environment in which it was thriving in the first place. Or maybe you put in a dehumidifier and you dried it out, right? That could be managing your stress more effectively, because we know that stress can play a part in that. Or even turning on a fan, maybe that's deepening your relationship with God. So there's so many parts of us, I think, that can contribute. And some of you may recall that my background is in oncology nutrition. When I was in my graduate studies, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and it got me really interested in how I could suddenly apply nutrition, my career path, in a way that could help him and potentially other people. So I got really interested in it. My dad is in remission. He's good and healthy. Thank you. When I completed my master's, I did my master's in nutritional biochemistry. I pursued a board certification in oncology, and that involved a couple thousand practice hours of face-to-face time with people while they got their infusion. They were in the infusion clinic or as follow-up treatments for radiation. And it gave me a wonderful insight to that cancer journey and how that was for people that had just gotten diagnosed or who were in treatment or who were facing survivorship. Because all of a sudden you're done with your treatment and you're like, now what? Oh, we'll see you next year for your follow-up. They're like, what? And it's really overwhelming. And I found that nutrition was such a powerful tool for people. It was something that they could take total ownership over and empower their life and promote wellness and feel good again and recover from this really, difficult experience that they had just endured and overcome. And so that is my aim today. The science in oncology especially is ever evolving. It has evolved so much even since I started my career in oncology nutrition. And I want everyone in this room to feel empowered by their choices and to use it to promote health and wellness. So here are our outline of our discussion today. First, I'd like to welcome you with a little welcome beverage. So that's something to sip on as we update you on the best produce at the farm right now. Then we're going to discuss where our reliable and credible information originates in the field of cancer nutrition, which will lead us into our focus on today, what we call the top 10 dietary and lifestyle factors for cancer survivorship. It applies to everybody, even if you are newly diagnosed. During this time, you're going to get to taste our kale, apple, and carrot salad and a very green lentil soup. And then we're going to talk about my own spin on the top 10 points for health optimization, as well as some cancer-fighting foods, because that's fun, and some final considerations on the mind-body connection. And so if you've been here before, you may notice that I am not doing a cooking demo today, and that's just to be a good steward of our time. I felt like this deserves all of our time and attention today. And I'm also not going to do a recap, but I'll briefly touch on what we talked about last month. So this is our carrot and ginger orange juice, and this comes from the Long Table Cookbook, Plant-Based Recipes for Optimal Health. I love this cookbook. This is like one of my new favorite cookbooks. It's all plant-based. It is created by a group of people that have developed a lot of community nutrition tools that is very credible. It's really good information. And they've encapsulated it beautifully in a number of recipes. And I think my favorite thing about this cookbook is that there's a lot of special occasion recipes. And I think if you are practicing a plant-based diet, hosting people can be difficult, especially people who aren't very receptive to plant-based nutrition. We have lots of wonderful family and friends in our life like that. And also special occasions like Christmas or Easter. And so it's really creative, colorful, not difficult. This is a great tool for you. So if there was a beverage that could encapsulate wellness and wholesomeness, I think this would be it. It's pretty easy, especially if you have a juicer, and I do not, and I was still able to make this. The yield is pretty good. And you can see from the ingredients that it requires 5 carrots. If you buy the cookbook, there's like a yield for higher amount. Meaning it'll tell you to make 9 carrots if you want double the amount of juice or something like that. These carrots came from our farm, so it's a great way to purpose produce from the farm. 8 large oranges, some ginger, and turmeric, which both have some beautiful anti-cancer, anti-tumor properties, as well as a little bit of honey. You could scrap the honey if you don't want to add any extra sugar, but the spices definitely make for a zesty juice. And then we added a little bit of sparkling water just because it makes it kind of refreshing too, but you could scrap that too. And you could even add cinnamon or nutmeg. I think there's lots of different opportunities to mix up this juice. Good eats, yeah. You are. That's such a wonderful question. But yeah, you do retain a little bit of the soluble fiber, which is what hangs on to all of the water activity in produce, but a lot of that is eliminated. So I'm always a fan of retaining that nice residual fiber if you can, but it's time and a place, I guess. Yeah. So lots of greens, as I mentioned before, kale and baby kale, lettuce mix and arugula, spinach, Swiss chard. They're all beautiful and delicious and on our back table. And then carrots, which is my personal favorite at the farm. They're so crispy and sweet and lovely. And cilantro. If you go into that part of the hoop house, like the cilantro just wafts over you, and it's glorious if you like cilantro. I can see that would be difficult if you don't love it, but lots of good food up there right now. So as I'm sure most of us can attest to, there is a lot of really wonderful information available to us on the internet. There's also an abundance of unreliable information, and it can be really hard to navigate that and determine what is good information and what's information that we can't lean on, because every good myth has a degree of truth in it. And so I think that's why we need to be an informed consumer and an educated skeptic and really try to hone in on the good stuff, the stuff that we can we know is truthful. I think that this is a field too which is heavily inundated with supplement companies that are looking to prey on patients who are trying to optimize their tool set in the best way they know how. And I know that there's not only a lot of patients that fall victim to this, but practitioners as well that are just looking to sharpen their tool set. So again, we have to be really careful about the information that we follow. Fortunately, we can rely on our consensus guidelines. So consensus guidelines are recommendations largely developed by the World Cancer Research Fund and its strongest affiliate, which is the American Institute for Cancer Research. This is a leading, very well-renowned source of information that has dedicated its whole mission to the diet-cancer relationship. And they were founded in 1982 to address the simple but then very novel idea that cancer could actually be prevented. And they have dedicated all of their research. They've even generated over $100 million worth of their own research that's unbiased, addressing cancer, lifestyle, cancer prevention, and the disease process. They are probably most famous for their expert reports. So they just published their 3rd expert report in 2018. It happens every decade. It's built on the decades that precede it. And this is a really powerful document. In case you're looking for some juicy late night reading material, it's only 12,000 pages long. And if you don't have time to read that, they do summarize it into our top 10 recommendations. And so what they're looking for is themes in those recommendations. So after 12,000 pages, you can imagine they unbury a lot of interesting themes, and they are very consistent. Now, if some wacky study somewhere, John Smith et al., says that drinking lots of Coca-Cola and smoking cigarettes prevents your cancer, prevents the risk of cancer, then I want you as a consumer to like really consider that. That's what we call an outlier, right? Something that you probably haven't heard before. And there's a lot of that when it comes to cancer. And so first of all, I want you to look at the study population. And it's one thing if it's like 500 people, how many people were in the study, but it's another thing if it was like 2 people. And then you have to say, well, I don't know about that. And then also their research techniques. Did they have those people smoke a whole pack of cigarettes and drink one Coca-Cola and then ask them right afterwards, do you have cancer? And they say no. Like, okay. But if they were followed for 20 years or something like that, then maybe it's a credible source of information. Now, if an additional 200 studies say that drinking Coca-Cola and smoking cigarettes probably is suboptimal, right, to prevent your risk of cancer, then we know that one study, which is an outlier, so it gets excluded. So outliers are important, but the American Institute for Cancer Research is looking for themes. It's looking for patterns. So it's looking for the thing that 200 or 300 studies consistently say over and over and over again. And that's where we have our top 10 recommendations for preventing cancer. And that's what we are going to talk about today. So you would imagine that after 12,000 pages, they probably would have some interesting ideas on our primary dietary choices for preventing cancer, and they did. And what's really interesting is that they all drew the same conclusion, which is a plant-based diet reduces your risk of cancer more than any other dietary pattern that you can employ. And all of these thousands of studies approached it differently. And I think that's what's like the most curious about all of this. So a lot of studies focus on the micronutrient density of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, and beans. So they said, this group of vitamins or this group of minerals or even the phytonutrients in this classification of produce was really impactful at decreasing your risk for developing cancer. Because phytonutrients have a lot of capability of doing that, right? Antioxidants and all these buzzwords that you probably hear. And that was true. They found direct links there. Now, another big category of studies focused on fiber. And they said, what? The more the compliments of Zoya. They focused on fiber, and the more fiber you had in the diet, the less likely you were to develop cancer. And that was true. And then another category of studies looked at what you were actually replacing in your diet by eating more plant-based foods, meaning the more plant-based foods you had, like beans, then the less meat you had or the less dairy products you had. And that was also true. And so even though all of their approaches were different, they all drew the same conclusion, which was the more plant foods you had in your diet, the less likely you were to develop cancer. Any questions about that? I started off with the biggest one, even though these aren't technically ordered. Okay, so there's a lot of different approaches that you could take. And if you are a meat and potatoes kind of person, you don't have to become a vegan today. But I think that it's a worthwhile investment to consider how you can transition your diet to include more plant foods. So here you have, good old American double bacon cheeseburger with, of course, a side of fries. And there's a lot of points of influence that you could explore when you're approaching that meal. So one is you could decrease the portion size by taking out an extra patty. Nobody needs 2 patties, even though I'm sure it's delicious. And so you can see as we transition to the right, we're moving in the right direction. We took out a patty. So now you have just a bacon cheeseburger. But you could also improve the toppings. So maybe instead of cheese, you could opt for a plant-based cheese. I know that's not quite the same, but you could also consider avocado. You could load that puppy up with some greens, some tomatoes, some red onions. There's lots of great toppings that you could put on your standard American cheeseburger. You could swap out the bun for a whole grain alternative. You just increase the fiber, you increase the nutrition of that meal just by doing that, and that's a really easy change. You could improve the sides. Wow, now our point of influence got really serious because you just swapped the fries for vegetables or a salad, and you just improved it substantially, maybe 100%. Or if you wanted to have a really strong point of influence, you could consider the protein itself. So one option is, looks like it kind of got put to the right for some reason, but one option is you could consider a lower fat meat. So instead of, a juicy, fatty beef burger, you could opt for a leaner red meat like buffalo or ostrich, amazingly, is a really lean meat. You could also consider a poultry burger like a turkey burger or a chicken burger, or a meat analog. We're moving in the right direction because these are getting exponentially more nutritious and lower in their risk. So a meat analog would be like Impossible Burger. And then you could even make a homemade black bean burger, or you could buy a veggie burger or make one from lentils. And I think that's where these cookbooks are really helpful because it's hard to think outside of the box. And cookbooks, plant-based cookbooks, provide us with a wonderful tool set of creative problem solving when it comes to putting together a plant-based meal. Because if you ask me off the top of my head, how do I make a plant-based burger? I don't know, and I've been doing this for a while. So I lean on these recommendations, these ideas for putting together creative meal plans. Any questions about that? Yeah.
What about like a portobello burger?
Portobello?
Yeah, portobello.
Yeah, that's a wonderful option. Yep, that's a wonderful option. Great suggestion. So doesn't this just make you so excited about eating vegetables? Yeah. Probably pretty nominal. I don't know, under 10 grams of protein. But I think that's okay. We've really explored protein sufficiency on plant-based diets and have come up consistently with population studies that demonstrate that even vegans unintentionally get about 70% more protein than they need, which is amazing. Because these people in these population studies, these are like 400,000 people. It's a lot of people. They're not even trying. They're not even thinking about protein. And they're ending up way over the recommended daily allowance for protein. So protein's in all kinds of foods, not just what we classically think of as protein foods. And so it actually even helped liberalize me because I know that like I don't have to be tallying in my brain like, well, where's my source of protein on this plate? Because I think it's just inherently in so many foods, you're kind of hitting the mark without even trying. Provided you have a well-rounded diet, right? Because you can be a junkie vegan and live on Oreos, but yeah. We'll talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. So what would you recommend for breakfast? Not necessarily a vegan.
Yeah.
I'm trying to eat better and I have that sweet tooth and the caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
So get that taken care of and then what next?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Instead of buying big, expensive eggs.
Yeah.
To go to like grocery outlet, not to name a brand or whatever, but a store, and get something that's already pre-made. And I know process isn't that great, but one little eggy kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Put that in, and then your vegan or vegetarian sausage.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do all my cooking for the rest of the day. I'm preparing my salads, all that in the morning. So then later, when it's like I'm coming off that high, done most of my stuff, kind of relaxed, that's all early in the morning. Then everything's already made for me.
Yeah.
And it's not really a sit down lunch or dinner. It's just, so the heavy, what is it? Eat like a king.
Yeah.
For breakfast, and then queen at lunch, and then the pauper at night
Mm-hmm.
for salad, some soup I made in the morning for vegetables. I kind of get rid of that.
Yeah. So what I'm gathering from your question is like what to eat for breakfast. Maybe that's like the primary thing to tackle. Again, I think that cookbooks, you don't have to follow any recipe that you don't want to, but it just gives you an idea. Like, oh, I could have something like that for breakfast. I could tell you what I had this morning for breakfast. I had rolled oats, and I made oatmeal from rolled oats. Those little oatmeal packets, I can feel my blood sugar go up. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But I added some berries to that. And I added a scoop of flaxseed, ground flaxseed to that. And I mixed in some oat milk. And it usually tides me over for 3 or 4 hours, but everyone needs are different, right? So that might work for somebody for an hour. It could be 5 hours later till you get hungry. But there's this huge spectrum of opportunity with breakfast too, right? So on one hand, you have, you go to like Joe's and you have scrambled eggs and pancakes and bacon and hash browns. Well, you could sub out one of those sides for a fruit. So maybe that satisfies your sweet tooth. In a perfect world, it would. You could sub out the hash browns for roast potatoes. It's a little more time intensive, but you could prep that the night before. I occasionally have a sweet potato for breakfast. Sounds kind of weird, but it's actually really satisfying. It tides me over. It's sweet. You could have the oatmeal that I mentioned. You could have whole grain toast. You could put something on that toast like avocado or nut butter. You could even have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I have a child in my home that loves peanut butter and honey. Great. That's fine with me. So the eggs, you could scramble vegetables into them, or you could swap them out. I know that scrambled tofu is not the same for everybody. It's kind of an acquired taste, in my opinion. But there's a huge spectrum of opportunity there. And if you're looking for ideas, I highly recommend cookbooks or an online search tool to help you with that. Just Google plant-based breakfasts. Because there's 1,000 things that you could have, but you have to be a little creative. It may be, you have to grow accustomed to that.
I was thinking more as far as protein, carbs.
Yeah, nuts and seeds.
All that going early in the morning.
Yeah. It might require you to change your routine. And I think of all things, in pursuing these recommendations, plant-based nutrition is the hardest for people. Even weight management feels more easily to overcome, because we're going to talk about weight management in a few minutes. But plant-based nutrition is really challenging because you have to change your routine. And that's why I think cookbooks are a helpful tool, but it also is a mindset, right? And it doesn't mean that Rome is built overnight and all of a sudden you're a vegan, but it took me 4 years to transition that way. It was when I was doing my board certification in oncology nutrition, and I thought, I can't be recommending this if I'm not doing it too. David was really perturbed about it. Like, what? But he is such a good support system and a good teammate. And it took us 4 years to transition to that. And now we are fully plant-based, and I love it. I prefer it. I feel so much better. But it was a challenging transition. So I would start small and just work in that direction. Maybe start thinking about how you're going to add versus eliminate. How I'm going to add more plant-based foods to my diet. Add produce, fruits or vegetables, add a whole grain, mix it up. Don't go to the store every single week and buy the same foods. Maybe choose a different vegetable. I actually charge my girls with that task when we enter the produce aisle or the farm. I say, okay, You have to choose one new thing, and it forces me to adjust to that. You could choose a different bean. You could choose a different whole grain. But I think a lot of that comes from diversity and practice and mindset.
So a question, making your own veggie burgers versus buying the plant-based burger already made. Is there like a nutritional benefit for making for either one, or is it better to make your own versus buying that?
Yeah, making your own is always better probably, but I just know that's not always feasible. And so I'd say that buying a veggie patty is still way better than like having a meat that you prepare in your kitchen and make. It's a whole spectrum, right? So do what is feasible to you, but probably putting something together yourself, you'll inherently add less salt and probably less fat and things like that.
Do you have an opinion of Beyond Meat versus all the other plant-based meats? Like which one is preferable?
I am probably more inclined to say Impossible Meat, but we actually did a class on meat analogs, and so if you're curious about more details about that, either ask me after class or you can look it up on YouTube. I think it was February. Radishes. I think with radishes we talked about meat analogs. It was really interesting. It's definitely a growing industry, and I wouldn't say like that's something to lean on every day, but it's a great substitute, and we actually call those transition foods in the food industry, you know, as dietitians, because they are intended to transition people towards more plant-based nutrition. So, and it's a great substitute. I mean, you can take Impossible Burger and stick it on the grill, and it looks like, I mean, you don't even have to add anything to it. It just looks like a burger patty. It's amazing. Okay, so this is our salad. Yeah?
Oats raises my blood sugar. I'm a diabetic. So what do you recommend for dinner or breakfast for a diabetic?
Well, a lot of fiber, probably. But maybe come talk to me after class and I'll give you a couple ideas. Okay. Yeah. So this is our kale, carrot, and apple salad. Kale is a really sturdy salad green. As you know, we have tons of kale up there. And we actually dress this even 30 to 45 minutes before you can serve it because it softens the kale. And I think that the carrots and the apples are a nice buffer to its inherent bitter flavor. So this comes from Nourish, which is the cookbook that we have back there. And these cookbooks were very generously donated to us by the cancer support community. Candace Sanders is our executive director for the cancer support community. I've worked with them for about 12 years. It is an organization that's very close to my heart. Their primary aim is to provide psychosocial support to people during the cancer journey. And so that could be patients, but it's also families and caregivers. It's a really wonderful organization, and it is quite literally a stone's throw from here. We're located in Templeton. I'm on the board of directors now, and Candace has been doing a really wonderful job leading the organization. So she brought in probably about 50 copies, and a couple things I want to point out about this cookbook is that it addresses cancer treatment and survivorship. So it is not completely plant-based, but my point in that is that I think you should cook. So have a cookbook and try cooking in your own kitchen. I think it's a good challenge. It's a worthwhile investment. Secondly, you'll notice that some of these recipes are palliative, and that's because we see all kinds of symptoms that surface from chemo, radiation, and even into survivorship. And then with the non-plant-based recipes in this cookbook, don't be afraid to experiment with your plant-based spin. I do that all the time. In fact, there was a recipe in here I was looking at. I actually didn't have time to try it. Kale and white bean pot pie with chive biscuits. That sounds like some good soul food, if you ask me. And it called for buttermilk for the biscuits. And so I was thinking, oh man, what can I do about buttermilk? I haven't experimented with that, but from a plant-based standpoint, I don't think you can even buy vegan buttermilk, but maybe you can. And I Googled it, and I kid you not, in about 10 seconds, I found out that it was soy milk and lemon juice. And in 3 minutes, you have buttermilk. So there's very often a super simple alternative to make a recipe plant-based, and I don't want to limit you in that. So feel free to experiment. And if it doesn't turn out, well, maybe don't try a recipe, on the night that you're supposed to have 20 dinner guests. But Cancer Support Community. Yeah, it's a really good, yep, that's a brochure. It's a really good community organization. So the ingredients include a shallot, some apple cider vinegar, olive oil, apple cider, that is drinking apple cider, but you could sub that out for a different juice if you have one available. Some whole grain mustard and maple syrup, and some salt and pepper. That is the dressing. Throw it in the blender, homogenize it. And then the kale and the carrots came from our farm. We also did have radishes. I think they have turned over into something different now, but we might have radishes later in the year. You'll notice as those temperatures get warmer, the radishes get a little spicier. So if you see them up there in the summertime, be warned that they can add a spicy element to your salad. And you don't have to cut these into matchsticks. In fact, I think that we diced them today. Leah is a superstar. She made the juice for you all today. She's amazing. And she also helped out with the salad, and so did Elena. You'll see them come out here. Elena's up there with her baby, harvesting all that kale that you're enjoying right now. She's really awesome. So yeah, that is our salad today. I hope this inspires you to experiment. So I want to take a quick tangent on phytoestrogens, because phytoestrogens have been the topic of concern and speculation for a really long time, especially related to hormone-sensitive cancers, and that's due to their chemical composition. They have estrogenic or even anti-estrogenic effects, and they are most concentrated in two forms. One is soy, and that's isoflavones. For some reason, soy gets all the attention when it comes to phytoestrogens, but even more concentrated, that is ground flaxseed. It's not really readily available in flax, like the whole seed, because that seed husk is so thick, your body has a really hard time breaking it down and making those phytoestrogens available to you. But in the form of dietary lignans, that is the form of phytoestrogens for flaxseed. But we're finding, with more and more years of research compiled on itself, that dietary lignans and dietary isoflavones are amazing at improving our risk for cancer, decreasing our risk for cancer development. And that's because phytoestrogens have been shown to be selective. They are estrogenic when it's helpful for you, and they're anti-estrogenic when it's helpful for you. And that is one of the most remarkable properties about whole food nutrition. So they have been shown consistently to decrease the measurable risk of all hormone-sensitive cancers. That includes breast cancer, endometrial, ovarian, and prostate cancer. So yes, that applies to you men in the audience as well. They have shown to consistently lower the incidence of disease recurrence, meaning that that cancer is less likely to return, reduce the mortality of survivorships, and therefore improve survivorship and improve lifespan, and enhance the effects of tamoxifen. That's more specific to ER-positive breast cancer, hormone-sensitive breast cancer. But phytoestrogens seem to be a very powerful team, making that drug work even better to promote survivorship and lifespan after the cessation of treatment. These studies were performed in both Asian and US populations, and that's really important because soy has been around in Asian cuisine for a really long time, whereas in the American diet, it's relatively new. So that's an important feature of these studies. I would say the only caveat is to choose a whole foods organic source. That's especially true for soy, which is a very common genetically modified crop. It's also a common conventional crop, and both of those have been shown to be contaminated commonly with glyphosate. Glyphosate is a group 1 carcinogen in the form of Roundup. And that crop, about 80% of it retains glyphosate. And so since we know that is a known carcinogen, it's probably best to choose an organic source and eliminate that risk factor. Yeah.
So can you ingest the soy protein through a soy powder, like in your morning smoothie?
Yeah, you could, but I always recommend a whole food source. So my recommendation to you is if you want to add it in a smoothie form, you could either use an organic soft tofu. That would make your smoothie really soft. I mean, the best source would be like edamame soybeans, right? You know, transitioning away from that, maybe a really soft tofu, an organic tofu, or even a soy milk. But the more whole food the source is, the better the known effect is.
So tofu doesn't have to be cooked. You can get it right out of that carton and stick it right in whatever.
You could. Yeah, it makes for a very creamy smoothie. It's also like a blank canvas. Doesn't really have a flavor, which is why I think people are critical of it. And I know its texture can be intimidating, but it's really soft and flavorless. So in a smoothie or a sauce, it actually works pretty well. You can almost use it like a cream.
So are you talking about an organic soy?
I am. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it related to like gut bio or something that you should adjust internally of why people
Yeah.
are sensitive to it? Or
Yeah, someday I'm aiming to do a class on sensitivities because I think it's fascinating and it's really common. But soy is a really common food allergy. It's a really common food sensitivity, which is an immune response to food that's not considered a true food allergy. And it's a common intolerance, meaning your gut does not like it. But as soon as it's out of your gut, you're fine. And so if it's an intolerance, it truly is an intolerance like lactose intolerance or something like that. You can actually supplement with an enzyme that's specific to that. It's conditionally supplemental, so I won't get into that too much, but with an immune response, like it gives you a systemic response when you eat it, it's probably best just not to, unfortunately. Sometimes your body forgets those because those immunoglobulins that inspire an immune response turn over, they die, usually within 3 months. And so sometimes if you eliminate a food that you're sensitive to for like 6 weeks or even 8 weeks, you may be able to ingest it without any effect. You know, so glyphosate, which is Roundup. Roundup is a really powerful carcinogen. And so unfortunately, it's just retained in the soil and in the crop on which it's sprayed. Yeah. And so we end up ingesting it when we eat non-conventional soy product conventional soy products. Yeah. Yeah.
Mexico is actually banning glyphosate.
Yes, they have. And they are starting to ban it here. So I think in 2023, they're banning residential use of Roundup, but not commercial use, which, like, hello. But we're getting there. It's such a powerful, such a powerful industry. I have some other choice words for it that I'll refrain from using. But I also feel like, protect us, So. Okay, so now that we know the most important dietary variable, body weight is the most important lifestyle variable when it comes to preventing cancer and probably a lot of other disease. In fact, as far as lifestyle factors are considered, next to not smoking, maintaining a healthy weight or aiming towards a healthy weight is the single most important thing that you can do to decrease your measurable risk of cancer. Single most important thing you can do. And that is because of a lot of factors, but most namely, body fat doesn't unfortunately just sit there. It acts as a sort of hormone pump. that releases estrogen into your bloodstream, as well as other proteins like cytokines. Those are pro-inflammatory proteins. And cancer is thought to be favored in an environment of inflammation. And so when we're talking about that dark, moist basement, that is an environment, right, that favors mold growth. Well, body fat, excess body fat, is an environment that favors cancer growth. So this is tough. This is a really hard one. I know that this is a personal challenge for many, but it is at least something that you have the influence to control. So really thinking about your points of influence and what you can do to transition towards a healthier weight if this is a personal struggle of yours. I think the government had this in mind because they recreated the food pyramid into what's called the MyPlate Method. And the plate method was a lot more applicable. I don't know if you guys saw the last food pyramid, but it was ridiculous. It was like vertical columns, like who can read that? But anyway, in a perfect world, your plate would look like this. The American Institute for Cancer Research very much disagrees with the cup of dairy products there. But this is from the USDA, not the American Institute for Cancer Research. So you can see that half of that plate is made up of produce. So that right there is a big opportunity for influence. A fourth of it is whole grains, not just like any grains, but whole grains. And then the last 25%, which is technically a third or less, is a animal protein source, or ideally a plant-based protein source, because fiber has been listed as the #1 nutrient of concern in the American diet for the last decade. And so if you had 100% of your plate made up of plant foods, you would very likely be satisfying all of your fiber needs that you could ever hope and dream to. And so this was their aim, was addressing fiber. As you can see, fiber saves the day. I'm not just talking about bowel health. Because if your plate looked like this, you would certainly be getting all of your fiber. And so you can guess that fiber is my favorite tool when it comes to addressing weight management. Fiber is heavy. It absorbs a lot of water in your gut. There's a lot of speculation that we eat about the same amount of weight every single day. And so if you're eating really heavy foods that have very little to no calories, you'll probably be satisfied with a plentiful diet that is comprised of less calories and can certainly help you in those weight loss pursuits. Not to mention, fiber does a lot of other wonderful things, right? Like stimulating our gut microbiome and building our immune system and things like that. So other considerations for healthy weight management would be establishing a daily exercise regimen, or just really promoting activity in your life, moving more and sitting less. Limiting your consumption of refined carbohydrates like sugar, because sugar is the opposite of fiber. It is very lightweight and it has lots and lots of calories. And so that is easy to overconsume. Making small tweaks that last forever. This is one of my other favorite tools, because if you tell me that you're going to swap out your coffee creamer for oat milk or something, and you do it for 2 weeks, it meant nothing, right? That didn't get you anywhere. You were just dissatisfied for 2 weeks. But if it's something that you can change and it will last for the rest of your life, then that weight's not going to come back, right? And so that's what we're looking for, is something that you can sustain and stick with for the rest of your life. So hopefully they're really positive, happy changes. Getting your rest. Food makes us feel really good. It's a wholesome experience. It's part of the human factor. And so if you are tired and slogging through your day, naturally you would want to eat more because you're trying to uplift yourself. So that's a consideration. Prepare and make a plan, probably a grocery list too. If you find yourself coming home and winging it every night for dinner, that is not setting the stage for success. We tend to eat out more and probably overconsume when we do that. And it just leads to Not as much success as when you have a menu and a grocery list. Practicing mindful eating. If you're eating in front of the TV or the computer or busy doing other things like driving, you're probably not consuming or really thinking about what you're consuming. And then addressing variables that trigger overeating. So probably my favorite is you get home at night and you sit in front of the TV, you're unwinding from your crazy day or whatever, and you have that correlation strongly built in your brain that you need a snack when you do that. And so that's a variable to address, right? You either need to change the activity altogether, find something else that makes you happy, or you have to change what's permittable. Maybe you're only allowed to eat fruits and vegetables if it's in front of the TV. But I really think about those variables that are consistently contributing to overconsumption. Limit foods, consumption of fast foods and other processed foods high in fat, starches, or sugars, because limiting these foods helps control calorie intake and maintain a healthy weight. So we're going back to a theme now, right? This is where that pattern really picks up of healthy weight management. But it's not just limited to that, because we know that animal-based saturated fat, cholesterol, trans fats that are found in fried foods, refined carbohydrates, all of those foods have individual relationships with cancer. They're all strongly correlated with cancer cell initiation, growth, and proliferation, so disease progression. And that's because all of them individually activate pro-inflammatory pathways that exacerbate inflammation and create an environment that favors cancer growth. So this is the mold in the basement, right? It's kind of sensible though. I mean, fast food probably doesn't help decrease our risk. Number 4, limit consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. Drink mostly water and unsweetened drinks. So this, again, has to do with empty calories that lead to weight gain. Sugar-sweetened beverages especially, which we've now grouped artificially sweetened beverages into the same category, don't satisfy our appetite in the same way and can promote overconsumption of calories. So speaking of water, this is not yet a consensus guideline, but it is in the pipe works to become one. And so I have a feeling we're going to see a change in the guidelines over the next 5 years or the next expert report, which is that I highly encourage you to filter your water. And this is because water is regulated at the government level. The Environmental Protection Agency has been responsible for this and requires that our community districts publish, not only regulate it, but publish a consumer confidence report every year. The consumer confidence report encapsulates data from the entire prior year. So the next one that's coming soon in the town of Templeton will be available to us in mid-May to early July. That's usually when they submit it. Bless you. And it's just required to be published by July 1st. You can download a pretty copy of your own, or you can look at my copy. It's very accessible online, and they have a wonderful staff that's willing to help you navigate this report. You can see all the constituents that are monitored and the frequency at which they're monitored, the levels that are detected of those constituents. Some of those constituents are very concerning. And then they have goals. They have a public health goal, and then they have an action limit, or the highest amount that's detectable before they need to notify the public. So some of these things are monitored every single week, like microbes. If there's E. coli in your water, you need to know, like now, right? And they do a really good job at that. But some of those things are tested annually. And then some things are tested every 3 years. So this is one reason that I would encourage you to filter your water. In addition to that, there are public health goals, and then there's action limits, as I said before. But a lot of those constituents are measurably over the public health goal. That's another reason to filter your water. And then lastly, some of these things are measured every 3 years. So you're not going to find out about it for another 3 years. It's another reason to measure or to filter your water. You can do that with a home water filtration system like reverse osmosis, or if you don't want to install anything, it can just be a simple pitcher of water in your fridge that filters it. Just make sure you swap out the cartridge because the cartridge benefits you, not necessarily the company that's selling it. The most concerning of all of these is PFAS compounds. This has been a topic of a lot of public health concern. I wish it was more publicly shared, but I'm going to tell you about it in brevity. PFAS compounds come from all kinds of domestic products, and they're very difficult because they're super resilient. So they're hard to filter out of our public water system. They were first discovered in our county 4 years ago, and they are actively building a water treatment facility in Atascadero to address this. That water treatment facility won't be done for 1.5 to 2 years from now. So we're a little bit out from that. And they know that this is a problem. There's a lot of helpful tools online. You can go to the Environmental Protection Agency. You can also go through our own district, like the Templeton Community Services District. They're having a very difficult time monitoring it and also filtering it out. But PFAS compounds in our county are way over the action limit. They're really concentrated. And it's hard to know what to do about in the next couple of years before that water treatment facility is done. Yeah. Well, they are, PFAS is PFAS. Bottled water is an option. The FDA actually regulates that, so it's a different regulating body. I'd say the biggest concern with that is BPA and BPA derivatives, which is in the plastic that has been found to leach into the water. See, it's just like no winning here, you guys. But that's why I'd probably just get a home water filtration system, and you can invest in a really economical choice for that. So PFAS substances are per and polyfluorinated substances. It's a group of chemicals that come from the production of all kinds of household and domestic products like heat-resistant cookware, clothing, furniture, adhesives, food packaging. It's a long list. And the reason they're so hard to get out of the environment is because they are meant to be resilient. Like that's what we value in them, right? So we just didn't realize how much they have embedded themselves into the soil, and also the potential for them to contaminate our water sources. But they are known to adversely affect health, and that's still being studied. So there's just a learning curve there. And in the meantime, I would just recommend doing your best to filter your water. Even the EPA will suggest that. Yeah.
What is the source of them in this county, and why is this county higher than that?
It's not necessarily. It's a problem across the United States. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Templeton's not special in that way. I think they were measured to be higher in Atascadero and San Luis Obispo. But it also depends on the water source, because we collect our water sources from all kinds of different areas for these other constituents. When something is higher, they just dilute that water source, right? Unless like E. coli came back, they would eliminate that water source. But if it's measurably higher, they would dilute it with other water sources, other wells. But PFAS is like difficult to monitor. It's difficult to detect. It's hard to monitor, and it's harder to effectively filter out. I think it's everywhere. Yeah, I think it's everywhere. Yeah.
Very interesting. So I was doing a picture with a filter in it, and it's called Zero. So it's taking everything out. And I wondered, is it taking some good stuff out? Should I?
Yep.
We had a filter that was only supposed to be the liner in one of those treatment plants.
Yeah.
For 20 years, and it was over 40 years, and my water coming out process, I just have all the plumbing done in my house was yellow. Filled the bathroom was yellow. And they started going to other sources. Thankfully, I never called the plumber because no more yellow. It was that liner.
Nice.
So they did shut
Yeah.
the whole thing down for 6 months.
there's probably no one perfect water filtration system. Like there's always something that kind of gets left out there. But I think it's just like, just be mindful about it. I'm not trying to freak anyone out at all. But I see this come up a lot in the cancer guidelines, cancer research. And so I think that we should be mindful consumers. Water is something that you drink all the time, right? So just buy a little home pitcher and just make sure you filter your water. And if you have a cup like at night, middle of the night or whatever you're saying, that's not what's going to make a difference. It's like what you do day in and day out, like food, like exercise, like all other things. It's what you do every single day that matters. Yeah. What was your question back there?
I was just curious if
Yeah, they do actually measure for radioactive particles. And we were above the public health goal, but below the action limit for that. The water is pretty hard here, folks. Let me tell you. Gross alpha particle activity. So the public health goal is zero tolerance. And our data collection was average of 3, but up to 10. They are not required to have an action, meaning eliminate or dilute unless it's above 50. Big difference, right?
you can filter that out of your water?
I think you can do a pretty good job of filtering a lot of those constituents out of your water just with the home water filtration system. And if you go to the Environmental Protection Agency website, they suggest filtering your water. So it's a good take-home message right there. It's easy to do that. But here you do all these other things to be mindful about your health, and that's like a simple modifiable risk factor, you know. So the other thing that just popped up is that was the 3rd time we talked about sugar. That's the 3rd time that sugar reappeared in the consensus guidelines. So I think that's kind of an interesting theme. And if you were here last month, we talked about sugar metabolism and the glycemic index. The glycemic index, for those of you who weren't here, is how quickly food turns into blood sugar. And this is somebody without diabetes. And ideally, your blood sugar should be here, okay, which is between 70 and 110 milligrams per deciliter. If you're wondering that without diabetes, can your blood sugar go that high? Let me tell you, it can. And I know that because I carried around a glucometer for like a whole year when I was going through my training because I wanted to be deeply empathetic with people that I told to measure their blood sugar all the time. And there were things I ate when my blood sugar popped up to 140. So the concern about this is that when you get this big, fast peak, this big, fast influx of sugar because you ate something that turned into blood sugar really quickly, like refined carbohydrates, for instance, this peak triggers a cascade of inflammatory markers. So you have measurably higher systemic inflammation with this peak. And then to make matters worse, your body sees that big influx of sugar and it throws insulin at the problem. It's trying to get it down because you need insulin to help you utilize the sugar. So you also produce more insulin than necessary with this peak. And the problem with that is cancer cells are riddled with insulin receptors. Cancer cells love insulin because insulin's a growth hormone, a growth factor. And so we're concerned that insulin contributes to cancer cell growth. And that's probably the biggest relationship. It's not just creating an environment that favors cancer cell initiation growth, but it's also feeding it. So this green line is a low glycemic, high carbohydrate, low glycemic meal. You may be only eating carbs, but there's a lot of fiber. You're going to produce the perfect amount of insulin and get a nice soft fall or rise and fall in your blood sugar and probably produce the perfect amount of insulin to achieve that. So you are biologically wired to prefer easy energy. That could be in the form of sugar or fat because it is easy and dense. And our bodies are naturally more drawn to those things. But you have to be very intentional, right, about choosing something different, something high fiber and wholesome so that you can avoid these big influxes. And then look, that sugar popped up and boom, it went low. And what happens when it's low? You're hungry. And so maybe you just consumed 2,000 calories here or something way more than sufficient, but now you are falsely hungry, needing energy to bring it back up.
Just a couple of examples for the high GI and low GI.
Yeah. So the glycemic index is mostly influenced by fiber, but there's lots of things that affect insulin sensitivity. And so part of that could be a meal that promotes insulin resistance, meaning the insulin's not working really well at getting the sugar to be utilized. And so the example I gave last month was a plate of fried chicken with some mashed potatoes and a good old Coca-Cola to wash it all down. Because even though there was chicken, which is protein, and there was fat, the fat in animal products decreases insulin sensitivity, making insulin less able to do its job effectively, and we see higher levels of blood sugar in the setting of fat. I know that was a really complicated answer, but this could be a candy bar. I mean, it could also be instant oatmeal, it could be white rice. I mean, there's a lot of different things that are considered surprisingly to hit your blood sugar hard and fast. Yeah.
Does caffeine affect that?
Not exactly, because there's a different pathway of metabolism, but if you put a lot of sugar into your coffee, it might. Yeah. Urethra, yeah. I know what you're talking about. So no, they don't. And for the most part, no artificial sweeteners notably raise blood sugar. However, there are negative side effects to all of them. So I'd say your urethral, or I can't pronounce it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah, it actually has some antioxidant benefit, but they're noticing that has some mutagenic downsides, which can alter your DNA. So it's probably suboptimal. And even stevia has that potential for impact, but that's over a reasonable serving a day. I think in general, like less is more with those, but there are a lot of like more nutritious, added sugars. So date sugar has tons of antioxidants, actually has a really beautiful nutritional profile. But agave nectar has the lowest glycemic index value. I think the glycemic index of agave nectar is like 10 or 11. So it's almost like having a whole fruit, Date sugar is like a little thicker though. This is like also harder to use. Yeah, it would be good for brownies. Good idea. I was thinking in your coffee, it might be kind of weird, but yeah. Yeah, you're going to make me regurgitate it again. Does anybody know what we're talking about? I don't know. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mulder. Suboptimal. I probably wouldn't. Yeah, suboptimal. I probably would not use it. Yeah. All right. So daily exercise, be physically active as part of your everyday life, move more, sit less. And that's because exercise offers us a whole host of benefits. It helps us, of course, achieve and sustain a healthy weight. This is independent of weight. Exercise is really good for decreasing your risk of cancer, independent of weight. And then it also boosts all kinds of immune properties. It's really influential on your immune system. And of course, it offers overall physical and mental health, even during treatment. I see that people are really benefited by daily exercise. So the guidelines suggest 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous activity in a whole week. That's really only 20 minutes a day of moderate exercise or 10 minutes a day of vigorous exercise. And I think that's really achievable for most people. But we do see higher benefit with more exercise for its true cancer prevention, or if this is, a strong point of influence for you, especially with regard to weight control, higher levels of activity greater than an hour a day provide additional benefit. Obviously, that caps out after some point. You know, you can't go out and run an ultra marathon without some kind of risk. So I would say aim for an hour or whatever is feasible and sustainable for you. If you're naturally a more sedentary person, though, 20 minutes a day still might feel like a lot. Some ideas, some considerations might be just to start moving. Walk to your mailbox. I love the Nike motto, just do it, because I can talk myself out of exercise every single day. But I try to put on my shoes and I get out the door. I think actually morning exercisers tend to find more sustainability because there's less things that are likely to interfere with your plan. Making a plan can be very helpful though. Prioritize it. It has to be prioritized if it's ever going to happen, because you will find 20 other things to do during that space of time. Starting easy, you don't have to run a marathon. Maybe aiming for down your street and back is an appropriate first goal, and then just building on that and keep going. So make it sustainable. And I think finding an exercise that's enjoyable for you is probably the most influential in that regard, because it needs to be considered part of your daily life. It's an investment in yourself, not a chore, right? Maybe it's a chore, but try to make it a fun chore by finding an activity that you are enjoying and feels more likely to be sustainable for you. Number 6, limiting consumption of red and processed meat. Eat no more than moderate amounts of red meat, such as beef, pork, and lamb. And if you're wondering what moderate means, it's 12 to 18 ounces per week. So it doesn't mean that risk is eliminated at this amount, but we see abundant, measurable increases in risk above this amount. So they're just trying to aim for something that is more feasible for people. It's interesting because of all the 10 guidelines that I'm going to give you today, eliminating meat is the most protective of all of them. So you would think it'd be adding more vegetables. It's actually limiting meat. It's also the hardest thing for people to do. And so you have to be very conscious and intentional and creative about this, but I do want you to know it's the most protective. And this is due to about 20 factors, but I'm going to tell you the 4 most measurable ones and the most studied, which includes insulin-like growth factor 1. We abbreviate that to IGF-1. That is your body's natural hormonal response to the metabolism of animal-based protein. And malignant cells are covered in IGF-1 receptors. So that has been shown across numerous bodies of research to be very influential. We also have known carcinogens, namely heterocyclic amines and polycystic aromatic hydrocarbons. I won't quiz you on those two, but those are known carcinogens that are formed when you cook meat. So unless you're eating beef tartare, that's a really difficult one to eliminate. However, the longer you cook a meat and the higher the cooking temperature, the more carcinogens are produced. And then lastly, there are byproducts of digestion that happens in the metabolism and breakdown of animal-based protein in your gut. So the microbes in your gut microbiome are producing that carcinogen. That's a hard one to get around. So the guidelines go on to recommend eat little, if any, processed meat. So processed meat would be things that are preserved, like deli meats, bacon, sausage, hot dogs, anything that's been smoked, cured, salted, fermented, or had preservatives added to them. So this is where the guidelines have really shifted in the last 10 years. Because we used to just recommend little, but now we're seeing that even really small amounts of consumption have measurable increases in risk. And that's due to all the factors that I mentioned, in addition to chemical preservatives that are used in preserving meat, namely nitrites and nitrates, in addition to being probably cooked at higher temperatures and salted. So again, these are really hard things to get around. So if you're looking for opportunities to decrease your risk, but your family loves turkey sandwiches, then one idea is to cook a turkey or a piece of chicken and slice it and put it on a sandwich. That's one way that you can get around using processed meats, packaged meats. Or maybe this would be a good opportunity to use meat analogs or even a nut or seed butter, like a good old-fashioned peanut butter and jelly sandwich, tofu sandwich. There's a lot of opportunities for substitution here. But I think this is a very influential one.
So Trader Joe's has like nitrate.
They do.
Turkey.
Yep.
Where does that fall in?
It falls on one end of the spectrum. So at the far end, the extreme end, is what they're suggesting, which you shouldn't have any turkey that has the nitrates or nitrites added to them, right? So a step improved would be that same packaged turkey without the chemical preservative. So we get all the other things too, hard to eliminate, right? But at least you don't have the chemical carcinogen, because nitrates and nitrites are group 1 carcinogens.
What does seafood fall under?
Unfavorably, but not as bad as red meat. Yeah. Okay. Alcohol. For cancer prevention, it's best not to drink. So if you do drink, I would really, really aim to limit it, because this is where the guidelines have dramatically shifted, more than even the processed meat. They're finding that even really small amounts of alcohol are promoting disease risk. Not only cancer cell initiation, but cancer cell growth. So in the past, we've always leaned on a conservative approach, which is if you were to drink no more than 2 drinks a day for men and 1 drink a day for women. My best advice is if you are planning on including alcohol in any part of your routine, make sure that you are capping it at that amount and it's not on consecutive days. So less is more when it comes to alcohol. And that is because of a few things. One is ethanol is a known carcinogen, and that is the form of alcohol that you get in a beverage. So it's a known carcinogen. Secondly, ethanol makes your cells very porous, allowing an open door invitation to any other carcinogen. Isn't it ironic that when you're like grilling the steak, you also feel like maybe having a beer or a glass of wine? And so you're creating the perfect opportunity to invite carcinogens into the cell to change that DNA and initiate cancer right there. So normally that may have been blocked, right? But you had open door invitation. And then lastly, alcohol or ethanol decreases the absorption of protective micronutrients. So like folate in your beautiful green salad that you're having with your steak doesn't even get absorbed if ethanol is in the picture. So it's like a 3-edged sword. It just hits you at every level. So really thinking before you drink, really minimizing your consumption. That's especially harder at a restaurant. You go out to a bar or something like that. Serving sizes are generally bigger than our perceivable units of measurement. And one of my very favorite questions is, Marisa, I drink red wine for my heart because I heard that red wine was really good source of polyphenols, like really good for your heart health. And that is true if you cap out at 5 units a week. That's like 1 glass, maybe 1.5 in the entire week, and you are over 55 and you're female. So that does apply to some people, but yeah. Congratulations. But unfortunately, it doesn't apply to most people. And the amount of polyphenols in your good old Ghirardelli Square dark chocolate, 3 times the amount that you would find in 1 5-ounce glass of red wine. 3 times more. So maybe it's better to have the chocolate. But you can get polyphenols in all kinds of foods, in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, walnuts, green tea, really powerful source of polyphenols.
Are
Polyphenols.
Naturally in
Mhm.
wine?
Yeah, they're in the grape,
Yes.
specifically the grape skin.
Okay, because
Yep.
I know, because they make, the grape growers, when they make their wine, put nitrates in it now, which I know that they automatically have nitrates in them.
Mhm.
But they
Yeah.
say the homemade is better than the pot.
That's why I would go for your produce. Like no negative side effects. Red wine, amazingly, totally unregulated. Totally unregulated for the contents of your red wine. So there are some red wines in our area, in our county, that are biodynamic, and there's truly only grapes in that wine. But a lot of wines are pretty manufactured, and they're aiming for experience right out of the bottle. They don't even want people to have to put them in through a decanter or anything. And what is in that bottle is completely unregulated. You will never know unless you have a food scientist dissect or a chemist dissect it under the microscope.
What
So
would be something they put in wine?
formaldehyde, you name it. We studied this. I actually thought it would be cool to do like a vlog, about like all the interesting things I feel like our public should know. But it's a small community. We would be blacklisted by everybody. So we decided against that. But there's a lot of food preservatives and flavor additives. Some things are probably not as concerning, like mega grape is a really common substrate, carbohydrate that's added to sweeten wine. It's just grossly unregulated. It's not required to be on the label yet, but maybe we'll see a shift in that.
When you say non-alcoholic, are you talking about the non-alcoholic beers and like the non-alcoholic wines?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it could be any non-alcoholic beverages. Yeah.
Better, those are okay to drink.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think that's a favorable, yeah, that's a favorable substitution. I mean, obviously there's a spectrum there too. Red Bull is probably not great for you, but we went out to eat last week at In Bloom, and they had a beautiful non-alcoholic mocktail, and I just wish like we leaned into that more readily. It's almost like not socially acceptable sometimes to order a mocktail unless you're pregnant or something. But there's some beautiful non-alcoholic beverages. So I would say, knowing these guidelines, let's be more ready to consider those and lean into that, because that's a great substitution to consider. Yeah, it's just a fermented tea. So that might be a good substitution. There's a small amount of alcohol, but I think it's pretty nominal. It's like less than 1 to 3%. Yeah, time. Okay. So don't use supplements to prevent cancer. Aim to meet your nutritional needs through diet alone. And so for the most part, they're not helpful or useful at all in preventing cancer. There are some supplements, though, that can certainly support health. Like if you've been diagnosed with a vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency, I would encourage you to supplement with vitamin D, get yourself back up into the normal range. But I want you to practice caution and mindfulness, because this is a multi-billion-dollar, completely unregulated industry. Ask yourself some important questions. Why am I taking this? Because my friend told me or my doctor told me. Like, why am I taking this? What are the benefits, but what are the risks? What are the downsides to this supplement? Guarantee you're going to find some. How much should I take, and how long should I take this? It should not be forever, right? It should be a limited amount of time for most things. So be an educated consumer and an informed skeptic. Again, this industry is totally unregulated. So check for seals of approval. There are some nonprofit third parties like consumerlab.com. You can download full reports with a subscription, but it's a really interesting website. So if you are curious about your supplements, I highly recommend it. NSF, which is National Sanitation Foundation, or USP. Nature's Made supplements are usually stamped with that seal of approval. It does not tell you if the supplement is safe. It only tells you if the supplement actually contains what it says it contains. So if it says it contains 2,000 IUs of vitamin D and it's stamped by one of those, it actually does. And that's really important, because they did a huge crackdown I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, there was a lot of lawsuits that came out of this for huge companies, supplement companies got reamed, and they found that 98% of their supplements were all houseplants and beans. It didn't even contain, none of them contain what they said. So this industry is not here to protect you. There are some really good companies, but a lot of them are not, and it's not regulated. Beans and other like random byproducts of things, but none of which were the micronutrient. For mothers, breastfeed your baby if you can. Breastfeeding is good for both the mother and baby. Very protective about cancer with regard to cancer. And finally, avoid excess sun. Skin damage can trigger cancer cell initiation. What about vitamin D? That's our most concentrated source of vitamin D. Our RDA for most folks is set at 600 IUs a day. Vitamin D3 is more absorbable than vitamin D2. A lot of us do need supplementation with that. But if you don't know what your level is, then get it checked. Should be a routine blood test. See where you are and then supplement accordingly. You don't want more than you need. That's bad too. My master's in nutritional biochemistry was actually on vitamin D. And the USDA gave me a wonderful grant to complete my research. I did a human subjects research specific to women, trying to determine how much vitamin D we needed. And toxicity was just as serious as deficiency. And so we're kind of aiming for that sweet spot, which is individualized. This is our very green lentil soup. It is also from this cookbook. And lots of beautiful nutrition, lots of beautiful greens from the farm. It might even be nice on a fragile tummy. I think it has some nice layers of flavor that aren't necessarily overpowering.
What is the white stuff?
That is a vegan feta cheese from Trader Joe's. Yeah. So the recommendation from the cookbook, you can see actually is probably a regular feta cheese. But I think the vegan feta cheese from Trader Joe's is really good. It's a really nice substitute. It accomplishes much of the same thing. Depending on the broth that you use, you may not need quite as much salt, and all kinds of greens are good substitution in this recipe. When I made it, I subbed out the Yukon Gold potatoes for yams or sweet potato, so you can up your nutritional value with that. If you don't have cumin seeds on hand, you can substitute that for ground cumin. That's what I did. And if you don't want it to be spicy, then you can eliminate the jalapeno seeds. Dr. Linda Mulder made this soup for you today. So thank you, Dr. Linda Mulder, for your contribution. It is time intensive, but it's lovely. And you get a pretty big yield out of it. So here's my top 10 steps to optimize your health. Take control of your health. Don't be passive. This is you, and you only got one body. So take advantage of that opportunity. Eat a fruit or vegetable at every meal and mix it up. We tend to be creatures of habit, and we fall back into the same routine week after week. So aim for one produce item at every meal, and don't be afraid to diversify. More filtered water, less alcohol and sugar-sweetened beverages. Replace the meat with beans, nuts, or seeds or any other plant-based protein source as often as possible and as often as feasible. I don't want you to stress about it. I just want you to be mindful consumers. Eat real food. Aim for organic when accessible and reasonable. I wouldn't be surprised if organic came into the works with our consensus guidelines in the next 10 years. That next consensus report will very likely include organic. Be as lean as possible. Enjoy your food and the meal experience. Remember that indulgences are an important part of life. That is part of the human factor. Be mindful of portion sizes, especially when consuming calorie-dense foods. So if you decide to splurge and indulge, just be mindful of how much portion and proportion, right? Be active every day, move more and sit less. We aim to be an educated consumer, but don't stress about it. Some fun cancer-fighting foods. It's actually hard to summarize this because there's so many foods that help with preventing cancer. This is a short list. It's almost unfair to limit it to this, but it's not about a single magic bullet food. It's about a combination of foods, plant-based foods, that all provide benefit and work together. But alien family foods and cruciferous family foods, so alien would be like garlic, onions, leeks. Cruciferous would be like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels. Those have the biggest potential to address cancer at all three stages: the initiation, the promotion, and the progression. And so very comprehensive approach. Turmeric is amazing. And I'm talking about culinary turmeric, not a pill in a bottle. Culinary turmeric is really spectacular in its impact. Not only can it help repair DNA damage, but it can go into the cell and reactivate something called apoptosis. All of our cells have apoptosis. It's a programmed cell death. Anytime cells get unhealthy, they die. And that's how it's supposed to be, right? To make room for new healthy cells. Well, cancer is special because it turns off apoptosis, so it doesn't die. But things like turmeric and green tea can go into the cell and reactivate apoptosis so that cell dies. That's really remarkable. Green tea, for the same reason, as well as a wonderful antioxidant that it provides, ground flaxseed. Now you know that dietary lignans are really good. Nutritional yeast has a really special ability to boost immune function and stimulate our defenses. So I included that on this list. It's delicious on top of popcorn. Berries, especially dark berries like blueberries, anthocyanins are a pigment that have wonderful antioxidant benefits. Walnuts are probably my favorite of all the nuts, not just for their omega-3s, but for their antioxidants as well. Some really interesting research about walnuts and its ability to suppress cancer growth. All other vegetables, especially greens and tomatoes, and then beans and lentils, due to the fiber and the folate they provide, earn themselves a spot on this list. Yeah. From the root, it looks like ginger, and you peel it. It's really bright orange. Or you can buy ground turmeric and you can add it to your food. So I purposely make 1 or 2 curries every week just for the turmeric. And that was like a new experiment for me when we transitioned to a more plant-based diet 7 years ago. But I think that it's a great spot in your meal. Yeah, I do. Or I use ground turmeric. Yeah. You can get it at any grocery store. And this may have come from Trader Joe's because we used it in the juice today. That orange juice had turmeric in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love lentils.
Yeah.
But they don't love me.
Sure.
Is there one lentil that's not as
right? Doesn't have as much resistant fiber. Yeah, probably split red lentils have the most soluble fiber and the least amount of insoluble fiber, and they tend to be more digestible. They almost cook to like a potato consistency. But you could also try Beano. That's alpha-galactosidase, which is the enzyme that digests lentils or beans. And that is just specific to digestion. That's what we call it, intolerance. And sometimes you conditionally produce alpha-galactosidase, but with supplementation, you can decrease your need for that over time because you can train your gut to produce more of it. Beano, yeah. So you take like a couple tablets with a meal. Yeah.
You mentioned best thing, lots of veggies and tomatoes. What's all this talk about lectins and all that?
That is a whole discussion for another time, so I'm going to bench that one. But I'll address it when we cover gut health, because that's one of the talks that I want to do. Yes, they're wonderful for you. Yeah. Yeah.
Was there a difference between fresh root turmeric versus dried?
I imagine that fresh is always better, but yeah. Nature's Touch has beautiful turmeric roots there. Melanie in town in Templeton, she always has lots of turmeric. That would be another really good place to get it. Some final considerations about the mind-body connection. I put a picture here of my youngest child and my dog scooting around our kitchen because I feel like kids and dogs just inherently encapsulate this so beautiful, and I always have to go back to that and say, what would Charlotte do? Deepening your spiritual connection, having a relationship with God, having a relationship with something that is so much bigger than yourself, I think is a wholesome part of us. And again, we are multifaceted, complex creatures, right? There's so many parts of us that need nourishment, and your soul is absolutely one of them. And this was really explored in Dr. Kelly Turner's book, The Radical Remission Survivors, people that really worked on their relationship with God and deepened their spiritual connection. And I think that's something that really is worthwhile to address. Releasing suppressed emotions. You are harboring anger, you are harboring guilt, something that is weighing your soul down. I can't tell you how many cancer patients have told me this, that this was the reason that they got cancer. And so address that, right? That's part of cleaning out your basement and opening up those windows. Increasing positive emotions. I think gratitude journals are really good at this. It's a simple daily practice of writing down things that you're grateful for every day so that you can rewire your brain to be scanning your environment, looking for all those positive attributes in your life. There's lots of great tools for this, of course. Embracing social support. A lot of us are caregivers in this room, and so it's not our natural inclination, but it's certainly an important one. Identifying strong reasons for living. Why are you doing all of this? Why are you taking good care of yourself? There's a bigger reason here. So really getting in touch with that. And finally, following your intuition. It's pretty amazing that almost all of the neurotransmitter, or the highest concentration of neurotransmitters, are connected to your gut. So that gut instinct is quite literal and is there for a reason, especially if it's pointing you in the right direction. Okay. No. They would hate me for it. They'd run away for sure. But I try to get good food for them. We've had 2 dogs die of cancer. And I always think about that. Like, what was it? Was their diet? Was it the water? I mean, you know, it applies to them too. How much exercise did they get?
It's important to read all the ingredients in your food.
Yeah. Unregulated. I'm sorry, was there a question back here? Yeah.
So I have banana in my morning smoothie with apple orange and stuff. And bananas aren't on any of the lists.
Yeah.
Is there an issue with it?
Bananas are wonderful.
Okay.
Yep. I'm a big fan. They have a higher glycemic index value, meaning they turn it into sugar faster, but it's a wonderful food. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm sorry.
What are your thoughts on like the Mediterranean diet for helping prevent cancer or like reoccurrence of cancer? Something that's better for?
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of dietary approaches, right? And so some feel that veganism is too restrictive for them and a Mediterranean diet is more feasible and sustainable, and that's a worthwhile consideration. Macrobiotic diet probably gets the closest to plant-based nutrition in the best way that is most parallel and supported by the American Institute for Cancer Research findings. However, I'm critical of that in that it doesn't encourage enough fruit. And so, you know, there are downsides to everything, right? But the more plant foods you can get in your diet, the less risk for cancer. Even swapping out 3 to 5% of animal protein will notably, measurably decrease your risk for cancer. So I would just consider it as like, what is the most feasible, what is the most sustainable, and how can I incorporate more plant foods into my diet? Okay, well, thank you very much for being here and enduring.